Welcome to the next episode of the Skibby Wiffle Ball League podcast. I am Bryan Benware, your host, and today I am joined by Peter Leicht, Hall of Famer, former captain of the Brewers, and we are going to do a lot of ranking today. Today's episode is brought to you by 1356 Public House, our presenting sponsor for season 20 and host of the Friday night opening day social event. Get out there, check out their big menu. Like I've been saying, their drink specials are amazing. They're at 141 in Big Bend. And then they do have trivia nights on Wednesdays. So get out there, support our sponsors. And after that, let's just get into it. How you doing, Peter?
I'm doing good. I appreciate you having me. It's been maybe a year or two since I've done a podcast. It's been a while.
Yeah, but you were a regular in our old version of podcasts. You hosted a couple. You're kind of the stats guru, which is pretty cool, especially with this one. We're going to be doing a lot of rankings, so I'm going to kind of pick your brain. I was trying to think of a clever nickname for you. Like, I forget who it is, that goofy dude in the NFL that was called the Professor all the time. So I was trying to think of a cool nickname for you, but.
Well, I think for now, Professor Pete, we can roll with that. But yeah, I think I was a founding father of the podcast variety back in the day, which I really enjoyed.
Awesome. Well, yeah, like I said, we're going to do some rankings. We've got a couple different things. The big news lately has been the top 20 just wrapped up. And so we're going to dive into that and get Peter's opinions on it and maybe look at some people who were left off the list. Maybe were ranked a little high, but let's just dive into that. All right.
Let's do it.
All right. So as I said, the top 20, and I'm just going to review it real quick. Okay. From 1 to 20. Spencer Bogad, Gus Skibby, Corey McCarthy, Sam Skibby, Scott Poley, Chris Metter, Jackson Crosley, Blake Spencer, Peter Leicht, coming in the top 10, Brett Spencer, John Callaway, Chris Vorbeck, Jimmy Nelson, Paul Castellano, Will Raff, Cam Smith, Ed Lodonin, Derek Cornell, Brian Kenny, and Steve Hayes. So, initial thoughts. What did you think once you saw the final numbers come out and the final rankings come out?
Yeah, in general, I'm certainly fine with it. It seems appropriate. I don't feel like I see a lot of overvalued players. I think there's maybe a few that are undervalued or not recognized, but I mean, it's not perfect. And I mean, if you consider the fact that somebody out there voted Gus 8th, which seems crazy to me. Somebody also didn't include Chris Metter on their list. And third is somebody voted Edlow number 1. And I believe that was Edlow.
Probably.
But those things all go into this. And so there's a lot of outliers, I think, that I'd prefer to scrub and remove, but here we are, and at the end of the day, the changes might be slight. So I think it's a fair representation.
Yeah. Well, and one thing that came up on a previous podcast was the way people vote. And I assume you voted for the top 20. I did as well.
Yes.
How did you vote? Like, what factors played into the way you voted? Because me personally, what I did was kind of like the way the NFL does it. I basically voted on last year's performance only. And that's who made the top 20 for me. So, but some people kind of play into, hey, what do we think is going to happen in season 20? What have they done over the past couple seasons? What kind of went into your voting strategy?
Yeah, much like you, I put the greatest emphasis on last year, maybe the last 2 seasons. Definitely not going back further than 5 years of the first pitch strike era. So, you see guys like, myself or Brett or some of the older veterans that were around long ago and have a lot of stats to back that up. That might be some where I think you get a little overvalued. But I definitely look at the last year or two. I think there's some players that they're not loud or sexy or flashy, and they, for that reason, they might be left off or kind of underrated a little bit. So I really like you said, I'm looking at recent history, especially as we're all aging, getting older. Last year is probably the most representative take on how this year will be.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just looking at the list while you were talking there, and I agree. I think there's a little bit of, I think some people just like an all-star voting kind of thing. There's a little bit of these guys have been around, have done it for a long time. They inherently maybe get bumped up the list from that. I was looking at, like you said, you were ninth, Brett Spencer was 10th, John Callaway was 11th, and their worst, you guys worst ranked in that same order were 14, 16, and 18, where, I think some of those ranks were probably a little bit low, but at the same time, you ended up averaging back out to the top 10. So, and then there were other people, like we didn't talk really about the almost made the cut people, but there were people, Patrick Gotti was 21st and he didn't even play last season. Kyle Cornell was 25th and he played game one and he tried to get through for you guys for what, 2 games, but with that injury, he really couldn't do a whole lot, but he still got enough votes to get right on the cusp of making it because he's performed for a long time.
Right. So, I definitely see some snubs, and I'm sure we'll get into those. And
yeah, well, let's jump into those. That was going to be my next question. Who do you think got snubbed?
Sure. So there's 3 that stick out to me. By number 3 snub, I'm definitely going to go with Jimmy Stout here. So he didn't seem to get a single vote as far as I can tell. He's not in the top 28, and sure he played a little bit last year. He went 2 for 8, but he really wasn't. He was there because the Brewers needed some players, and he wasn't healthy. He was post-op for surgery, and the 2 years prior to last year, he didn't play at all. So he's effectively been out of the league for 3 years. So I think that explains what most people why they would leave him off. But last year in summer league, he batted 600, which was tied for 4th. He played the most innings and was tied for 1st in runs. And he's got the hands to be a solid fielder as well after playing with him for a few years. So he's been battling Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. He recently had a significant surgery similar to the same surgery that Cedric Mullins had of the Baltimore Orioles when he was diagnosed with Crohn's disease before the 2021 baseball season. And Cedric Mullins went on to, he lost 20 pounds after having some of his intestines removed, but he was the only 30 home run, 30 stolen base player in Major League Baseball. And he finished 9th in the AL MVP race on the crappiest team in the whole Major League Baseball. So I think he's if there was stock in Jimmy, I'd be putting it all in there. I definitely can see him landing on this list next year, especially as part of the Astros lineup.
Yeah, well, and on a personal note, I'm obviously hoping for that. So, but we're excited to have him. And I think you're right. I think if people were taking into account what somebody could do in season 20, he should have gotten at least 1 vote to get on this list. And I would say the same thing for Jeremy Warrell. Jeremy Warrell has been lights out summer league and was an awesome pitcher for the Brewers last year, yet he didn't make the list either. Any thoughts on Jeremy? I mean, we obviously both know him really well. He's played for both our teams.
Yeah, he carried us to a big win over the Royals last year on the mound, and we needed more hitting than we thought we did going into the season with Kyle getting hurt, and he stepped up in a big way, hit a home run in game 1 against the Expos, and curious to see. And now he's on the Expos.
Yeah.
So,
well, and that's what I was going to say too. He's going to be playing a really big role for them this year. So the at-bats are going to be there. The pitching is going to be there because Jimmy can only pitch a total of 6 games. So he's got at least 4 potentially complete games that he's going to have to pitch, if not potentially more, depending on what happens. So he was somebody that I was a little surprised that didn't even get a vote. Somebody else who they were on the cusp of making it, 2 guys I was going to bring up were Ty Butler and Kevin Poley. I know Ty had a little bit of a down year, but he's unbelievable in left field and it has been a staple for them. And kind of like how the Twins always say they kind of go with Edlow. I mean, I always felt like the Royals kind of went with Ty. If Ty was doing well, like they were going to be amazing. But, he just missed the cut at 22. His best ranked was 10th though. So like people thought he should have been, in that top half. And then Kevin Poley won a gold hands in right field, and has steadily gotten better and better at the plate over the past couple seasons. Yet he didn't make the list either. He came in at 26.
Yep, I'm with you on Ty. He was on my list. He was my number 2. He wasn't ranked last year either, which I thought was interesting, but he was 14th 2 years ago. And in the past 5 years, and again, I keep saying 5 years because that's the first pitch strike era, and he's 7th in average, 7th in hits, and my favorite stat is he's 2nd in triples, which tells me that he's a hustler, and we know he's got solid fielding hands. He may defer to John Callaway and left this year, I presume.
I don't know, but either way, their fielding is going to be really, really good out there. So,
yeah, I'm big on Ty here. I think he's going to have a great opportunity to start fresh. And sure, he's had a lot of strikeouts in his day, but a strikeout is the same as a fly out or a ground out at the end of the day. And he's a solid guy to be off this list.
Yeah, for sure. Well, did you think anybody was overrated?
Well, not as much as I really tuned in on the underrated. I think I'm quick to look at myself here, coming in at number 9, because I'm like you mentioned, I'm big on the stats. And if you look at the past few years, or you go back 5 years, you look at average or home run ratios, things like that, I'd probably fallen more in the 10 to 15 category. There's no pitching value with me. Maybe there's some fielding value, but I don't think it's going to be as heavy as maybe it's been in the past with how the Orioles are shaping up. So I'm just going to, maybe it's a cop-out answer and just, look at myself in the mirror and say, drop me down a little bit. I do see Chris Forbeck landing at 12. I think I ranked him right around that same spot, but it is interesting to see how many people quickly pounce on a 1-year guy who had a solid year. He was ranked as high as 6, coming in at 12, and he may not play this year, from what I gather. But it's amazing to see how 1 year, kind of like Ty Butler's first year, was probably the best rookie year we've ever seen. Interesting to see how that all shakes out. I do want to quickly throw in my last underrated player.
Oh yeah.
Coming in at number 21. So, barely missed the mark there, but it's PG. And again, kind of like Jimmy, he didn't play at all last year. He was number 11 2 years ago in these rankings. And I don't think much has changed with him. I mean, he finished number 2 MVP, 2 seasons ago behind Spencer, and the summer league, preceding that season, he was probably the hottest player in the entire summer league. I think he won player of the week twice. It's a little different than the regular season, but he was pitching dominant. He was hitting dominant. He may pitch a little bit this year, maybe the 3rd pitcher for the Orioles. He's going to be relied on to be a top 4 bat. I mean, coming in at 21, it's easy to say he should have been in the top 20. And I would guarantee that he shows up on the list next year when we do this again.
Yeah, it would be hard to keep him out if he continues to produce the way he was before he took a season off. So one thing I was interested in, and I kind of feel like I know the answer, but you look at those top 3, and 3 was Corey McCarthy, last year's MVP. So 2 people beat him out. My assumption is people voted because of the pitching aspect with Gus and Spencer. But Corey McCarthy coming off 2 back-to-back great years, because he was rookie of the year before. And he had one of the top 3-4 rookie seasons we've seen in the SWBL. And then he comes and he doesn't have a sophomore slump and he wins the MVP. Any thoughts on that? I mean, I kind of feel like that's pretty explanatory when you throw in the pitching aspects from Gus and Spencer, but and he did get ranked first by at least somebody. So maybe somebody's just respecting that and saying, hey, he won the MVP. It is a hitting award, but
Yeah, I like it. I like where he landed. He went 2 years ago. He wasn't on the list, and I know there was some uproar there on voters not being educated enough to realize how good he is. Last year he was 12th, so he's had a steady climb up to number three. I don't know how much stock they put into fielding. I believe he won a gold hands and ride, or he can field very well.
Mhm.
He's not going to pitch like Spencer or Gus, but it's interesting to see him immediately preceding guys like Sam, Scott, Chris Metter. I think he's going to be a batting in the middle of that Twins lineup that's always going to put up runs. And 2 solid years in this league is enough. I mean, in some cases, 1 solid year is enough to show what you can do. He's had a couple, so I'm not surprised where he landed. I think it makes total sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and wrap that up. Any final thoughts on the top 20? Anything else you want to make sure we mention on the podcast?
No, I think I think this is the third year we've done this, from top 18, 19, 20. I mean, 10 years from now, I don't know if we're going to go all the way to the top 30, but we'll find out.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the future holds with the rankings and obviously what happens with the league. But well, let's move on. You had an interesting idea for the next segment that we're calling the top 5 most well-traveled players. And the way you kind of had described it to me was basically who are the top 5 true nomads of the SWBL, players who have been on at least 3 or more teams during the franchise era. And you have a list. I'm going to let you go through your list here, and then I may counter or add somebody that I've thought of.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's been a decade of the franchise era, and there's teams like the Rockies that have been around the entire time.
Yeah.
And
There's
guy
only
like
3
Blake,
left, actually. We brought that up on the last podcast. There are 3 original franchises left: the Yankees, the Rockies, and the A's.
yeah. So it's interesting to see, guys will stay true and true to their team, to their people. But as the years go on, and this past year was a huge shakeup, I feel like we're going to keep seeing people bounce around. So I think there's these guys that have played on at least 3 or 4 teams. They've seized new opportunities. They've left when teams disbanded and found a new home. But so I kind of came up with the top 5. And number 5 on my list is Paul Castellano. He started his first 3 years with the Rays, of course, part of their 3-peat championship run. Then he went to the Royals and spent 1 year there before going to the Athletics, and spent 3 years with that team. The year after their big and probable championship run, so he was kind of piggybacking off of that. 2020, during the first kind of COVID year, he did jump to the Braves, that kind of 1-year team with Sam and Gus and Steve Hayes. And he was nationally recognized for his fielding, being part of the first team, NWLA. And then now he's back to the A's last year, where he was nationally recognized for his pitching as part of the third team. And we all know he's a solid hitter. So, I mean, he's a 3-tool guy. He is the definition of 3-tool guy. Back to the A's this year, but he's one of those quiet guys, very humble, not loud, but just gets the job done, whatever you need him to do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I love Paul. I've always been a fan of his, and he's just a down-to-earth, awesome guy to be around too. So it just makes it that much better to watch him perform. And like you said, he's a 3-tool player. Like, there are only a few of those guys who have been nationally recognized for all 3 facets of the game. So, and he's one of them. So,
very true. Number 4 on my list is a guy we know well, Jeremy Warrell. We spoke about him earlier. He spent the first 4 years with the Astros, and then last year with the Brewers. He came in, and it was kind of a opportunity for playing time, really a need for a guy like him, whereas he may not have played as much if he stuck around with the Astros. And he recently re-signed with the Expos for this year. So there's his third team. Same, it's interesting. It's the same exact reason, same exact storyline. The Expos need players, much like the Brewers did last year. It's a great opportunity for him. He's going to get a lot of playing time. He's kind of found roles with more desperate teams in that moment. And I think that's part of the beauty of the league. If one team has a need somewhere, it just kind of naturally fills itself for the betterment of the league, really, and for the betterment of the player and the teams and everything. And ironically for Jeremy, I noticed that his past 2 years, first as an Astro, then as a Brewer, resulted in identical pitching stat lines where he threw 17 and a half innings, had a 1-3 record with 13 strikeouts. So now as an Expo, number 2 guy behind Jimmy on the mound, he's going to have a chance to repeat that or maybe improve those numbers and bringing his bat as well.
Yeah. And he was, like we had mentioned it, but he was a big bat during summer league. And so I think the Expos were kind of counting on that momentum to continue forward going into this year, because losing Brett is a big loss at the plate and then obviously at the mound. But, I think people are underestimating his bat and think of him as a pitcher first, which may be true because that's where he's had the most success longevity wise, but he's a great hitter. He just hasn't had enough opportunity in the past couple seasons to kind of show he slumped early in his career and then started kind of finding the groove. He kind of had that thing we see all the time with baseball players. They don't always translate to wiffle ball. And I think it just took him a little while to kind of get used to the style of play at the plate, but he's really come on the past couple of years, and I think he's going to do a lot of good things for the Expos this year. So,
yep, agree, 100%. My number 3 guy is you mentioned him briefly, is Brett Spencer. So he's played on or will play on his 4th team. He spent his first 4 years the franchise year with the Cardinals. Not a lot of postseason success, but he did win 2 Cy-Whittle awards playing with Sam. And then he spent his next 4 years with the Rockies, joining his brother Blake. He won 1 more Cy-Whittle and won championship. And then he spent his next 2 with the Expos, of course, with their championship from a couple of years ago. And now he's finding a seat at the table with the Orioles for 2022. So he brings success wherever he goes. And I think if I look into my crystal ball for the next 3 to 5 years of the league, I could certainly see him being on at least 1 or 2 more teams, just kind of playing with different guys, following the trend of, as franchises move along or opportunities present themselves. And he's always going to be that guy that people are calling after. If there's any whisper that things are shaking up and Brett's on the free agent market, much like a Paul or a Jackson Crossley has been, or Brett himself, I think those are the guys that are quickly high on everyone's target list.
Yeah, for sure. And he's been a part of 2 of the bigger shakeup years when it comes to free agency. They had that year where he chose to go to the Expos, and there were a lot of moving parts, a lot of new players that year. And then this year, obviously with the Royals and the Brewers disbanding, he could have easily stayed put, but he decided to, join Sam back up again. I think that was a big draw for him, but I also think wanting to play with you, we'll get more into the team aspects, like the individual teams in future podcasts, but sort of like even though you all haven't played together, sort of like getting the band back together. You guys are all really close friends growing up and kind of that core group who's been around for a really long time, and now sort of finding a way to get everybody on one team. I think that was a big draw for him this year. So,
yeah, I agree. I'm looking forward to it and seeing how it goes.
Yeah.
Number 2 on my list, and this is Will Raff. And when I think back to 5 years ago, this is kind of where my whole idea started with this, because and the term nomad is kind of where this began, because in Will's, I think the first 6 years of the franchise era, he was on his 4th team in year 6. He spent his first couple of years with the Royals, and then his next couple of years with the Rays, capturing a title with them in one of those years. but in 2016, and I totally forgot this. He played with the Yankees. He didn't hit. He pitched 14 innings. And he's always been a guy who's, everyone will say, he hits as well as anybody. But he doesn't bat all the time. He kind of was a half playing time batter. He was more of a pitcher. And that was kind of the compromise, I think, that where he landed in certain years. But after the Yankees in 16, he moved along to the now Twins, where he's been since then, and has gotten halftime hitting. And in a lot of those years, he's hit a little more than others because they've got a lot of guys, that can hit.
Yeah.
But he's in those 5 years with the Twins, he's averaged 23 innings pitched. He has a 20-4 record. And he is, I believe he was runner-up for Sci-Whittle twice. I see somebody ranked him as high as 5 this year in the top 20, but he's come in at like 15, 18, 17. So a solid player. Moved around early, I think, as there were some early shakeups, but you do wonder, I mean, he's a guy that, like an Expo team or a Desperate Brewers of last year. I mean, and we did reach out to him to try to land him. He could get full-time hitting, solid pitching, maybe more opportunities than he currently gets with the Twins, but clearly he's with the right crew. The Twins do a lot of things right. So it's just interesting to see, lefty pitcher. That's always tough for a lot of hitters. So he's got that advantage. So he's number 2 on my list. He's kind of the creation behind this list as well.
Yeah. I reached out to Will a couple years back. Probably one of the years I, lost my entire roster again and had to start over for the 3rd or 4th time. And I think I promised him like full-time batting or something like that. But I think there's an aspect of Will where he wants to win. And I think maybe that takes a little bit more precedence for him than some of the stats or hitting or playing time or something like that. And I mean, it just like the epitome of a great teammate. And then yet you look at how many teams he's been on too. So it's kind of crazy when you see the personality, but then you see the history behind how many teams he's been on, that he's willing to sacrifice for the betterment of the team too.
Right. That's very true. And so number 1 guy on my list is who from last year is John Callaway.
Good fan.
So he's finding himself on his 4th team as a captain of the White Sox. Not a lot of people remember the Indians from 2012, the original year of the franchise era. They stuck around for 1 year. He was part of that team with Alex Heck and Spencer. And then he went to the Yankees for the majority of his career, where they eventually won a title in 2019. And I think that one was huge because after 7 years, it was the first time that, a team won where it wasn't Metter or Brian Kenny, playing left field. So he was that 3rd left fielder to lead their team to victory in that sense. And then he, of course, was on the Astros last year, where similarly, I think he plays a huge role in leading the Astros to their first playoff appearance. But I think part of the whole master plan or long-term plan there was that he was going to be the next guy tapped by our beloved commissioner, Sam Skibby, to lead a franchise. So now he is taking the White Sox into 2020, pulling guys like Derek and Ty and Jackson Crosley from the Yankees onto his team. So he's got, I think that's going to be a high expectation team. I think for me, I mean, they're tier 2. They've got a chance to really make some noise, a playoff contending team for sure. He's got a way he can run things the way he wants to. And he's going to be a big face in the future of the league. So I think it's exciting to see how that team is going to shake out.
Yeah. I'm obviously a big fan of John, and we kind of always knew that when an opportunity arose for him to start a team that he was going to take it. I was just hoping as a captain, I was hoping that was going to be a few years down the road. And that wasn't to be, but I'm excited to see what he does. He was, sitting right next to me a lot of times when I was trying to think and make decisions, and I was bouncing ideas off of him and Cam and the guys. I try to include my team in decisions and ideas that I have, and get their opinions. And he was always willing to speak up, but he was also willing to support whatever decision I made. And I think I think that just showed me he's going to be a great captain. He has the guys that he really wants, that he trusts on his team, and if he makes a decision, I think they'll back him up as well. But I also think that he's gonna let his guys play, and I think that's why he constructed his roster the way he did. So I'm excited to see what he does, and I obviously think he's a great player. So makes sense that you had him at 1. But I'm going to bring up somebody who you left off the list that potentially could be number 1, and that is our loving commissioner, Sam Skibby. He is now on his 3rd team in the franchise era, starting out obviously managing the Cardinals and then joining his brother Gus for the past 6 seasons, I think, on the Royals, and now he is on the Orioles. So you left him off, and could easily say he probably should be number 1.
Well, Sam should probably be number 1 in everything, just for kind of creating this whole spectacle that we've lived for so long.
Yeah, but anyway, I just wanted to bring that up. So one thing I was interested in, why do you think there's a reason they haven't locked in on one team? You had kind of alluded to the way the teams, the makeups and opportunities come along, and it just always seems to work out for the best of the league. Do you feel like it's just coincidental that that's the way it's gone, or is there a reason you think some of these guys haven't, stuck with one team for, their whole career, or even just sticking around 2 teams? Because there are plenty of guys in the league that have been on 2 teams, but 3 or more is a different story.
Yeah, I think there's multiple reasons, and I think like with Jeremy Warrell, like sometimes I'll classify it as kind of the betterment of their situation, or the team that just kind of letting the pieces fall and following where the playing time is going to be and the true need. Second, I think it's friendships. It's the bromance. It's, Scott and Gus wanting to reunite, Brett and Sam wanting to reunite again, Brett and Pete wanting to play together for the first time, and those kind of things. There could be, third, there could be kind of the desire to win. I think is always a reason why someone might stick with a team or go to a new team. I don't know if a lot of people, I do think that the friendships, the situations are way above the championship desires for a lot of people. But naturally, as we see these franchises kind of turn over, or people wanting the opportunity to be a captain and kind of shake it up, it just causes this ripple effect. So I think, fortunately, it all gets managed. It all gets kind of, it all culminates in the right things happening and the right situations kind of fall into place. But I do think right now, this year several years back, it was, Sam and Brett had their big, LeBron James video where they were going to leave and kind of whoring themselves out to anybody and everybody to get the most bang for their buck they could. Now it's a lot more behind the scenes, and franchises may, are the Rockies going to stay around forever? There was rumor that Blake was maybe going to kind of move along and hand the reins to Bryan last year, but the Athletics, as you mentioned, have always been there as well. You just wonder how long things will last, and how I think this is the kind of the new norm. I think people are going to want to shake it up a little bit and play with different people year to year.
Yeah. It's in my opinion, it's great. It was a struggle with, you mentioned the friendships, right? And it was a struggle for me as somebody who didn't grow up with you guys to convince people to come play with the Astros, no matter what I promised or anything. That's a hard barrier to break. And I feel like some of those aspects are breaking down. I mean, we have less and less people getting drafted every year. So a majority of the player pool has been the same for the past couple seasons. And so I feel like even though you might not play with somebody, you're around them 3 or 4 or 5 years and you get friendships. I mean, Jimmy Stout's a great example. The moment Jimmy came into the league, he seemed to be friends with everybody. But he and I had a great bond, and we always talked about wanting to play together at some point, and it finally just happened. But we, with all this shakeup, and you said you kind of see that being the norm. I wonder, obviously this year was a big year for free agents with 2 teams disbanding, but do you feel like it's going to be more about free agency than the draft in the next 5 years, let's say?
Oh, I definitely do. I mean, the draft is, I wish the draft was this huge spectacle that everybody cared about, but sure, you can get like a Ty Butler,
Yeah.
or a Chris Vorbeck, but even in the draft, those guys, there's one team that has their sights on them. No one knows enough about Chris Vorbeck to know, hey, we should try to swindle him away from the A's and offer him. These contracts they're not lucrative. They're not. We're not buying and selling players here.
Yeah.
I think the free agency moves are really where it's going to be. The draft it's fun because we love seeing new people come in here. Like you mentioned, like yourself, like you knew Sam, that's probably about it. And you came in and now you're besties with everybody. Same with Jimmy Stout, who you mentioned. He knew me and now he's everybody's best friend. So we could get more of that through the draft, and probably get some of these nationally recognized rookies coming in, like a McCarthy or a Ty or a Vorbeck. But there's, what they always say, if you want to play in this league, you got to know a Skibby in some fashion. And there's a list of people that would surely love to play. And there's some unsigned free agents that haven't been signed yet, but there's just limited spots, with the 9 existing teams.
Yeah. Yeah. And unless we go to another expansion of some sort, it's probably going to be that way. But I think, one thing I was just thinking about was the fact that we see a lot more 1-year deals, especially this year. A lot of people signed for 1 year. You had a couple people, Gus signed for 10 years. But maybe gone are the days of those long deals. I mean, I don't think any captain is sitting there like holding some player's feet to the fire saying you signed a 6-year deal and you can't play with somebody else if their desire is to go be with some other team. But I think that people might just stick with 1 or 2-year deals and then kind of open it up and see what comes. What do you think?
No, I agree. I mean, it was about a year ago at this time. I remember being on the phone with Jeremy Warrell and being like, "Hey, Jeremy, like we have a need on the Brewers, and I've talked to Bryan a little bit. If you want to come play with us, I think you'll get some good playing time." And his response was something around, "Well, I don't know. I signed a multi-year deal with Bryan. I have to figure that out." I just don't, the contracts here they're fun, and as a captain for the past 8-9 years, I really enjoyed putting some incentives in there and kind of trying to spice it up and putting my own money on the line to get players to perform and whatnot. But no one, yeah, right. No one's going to hold you to a 10-year contract if it's for the betterment of yourself, a team, other players to go play somewhere else. I feel like we may as well just move to kind of 1-year contracts altogether, just to kind of focus on 1 year at a time, because I do think these kind of shakeups could be more of a thing of the future than they have been in the past.
Yeah, maybe we'll see more trades. That would be, in my opinion, a lot more fun. People who are on contract come up with the trade, something fun. I mean, we traded Chris Overlord, who doesn't play a lot, may not play at all, had a baby last year, so wasn't available. But, we traded him to the Twins this year for, the Twins changing their profile pic on Twitter. So just fun things like that, or even player for player would be interesting. We haven't seen a lot of that, so maybe that's something that happens in the future.
Yeah, no, I love trades. I think that, and there could be a time like mid-weekend where an injury happens or someone's busy and you need to trade. I think Evan Close, many years ago, Evan Close was traded from the Rockies to the Expos for some natty lights or something. And he's been with the Expos for a long time. I rumor has it he may be going back to the Rockies, or I guess back to the Expos. But again, it's all about, if something happens, we will find a way to make it work for the league, the teams, the players. But yeah, trades are fun, especially even if it's for like a warm beer, just somebody needs that warm beer.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially come Sunday and everything's hurting and they could use a little painkiller for sure. So,
Yeah.
well, let's move on. Let's move on to this next segment. And it was another idea you brought up, but it was Missouri State alumni versus Mizzou alumni and the ultimate rosters from players from those schools. So first off, this is so creative. So what made you think about this?
Well, I'm a creative guy, Brian. I'm trying to remember. I feel like I was thinking about our SWBL national team, and Sam, Gus, Spencer, Jackson. Those four guys are all being Missouri State guys. Obviously, Chris Metter is a big part of that team as a Mizzou guy. They've had some other guys come and go, but I think that's kind of the core boys club that we've seen go out there and represent the league. And having gone to Mizzou, I know a lot of guys. I'm quickly aware of all the talent that we have that went to Mizzou. So, and it's, we're all pretty much local, born and raised in St. Louis, and those are two of the schools where most people go. So I started mapping out in my head, and this podcast, I kind of put pen to paper and was like, well, what kind of lineups what would the lineups look like, and how deep would they be? So
yeah,
that's kind of where it began. And I drew up Missouri State. I kind of thought about positions and depth, and did the same with Mizzou. And then even took it to the third realm of other categories. Not everybody goes to Mizzou or Missouri State, and there's a pretty decent team for that third category as well. That's kind of where it all began, I guess.
Yeah. Well, run me through your lineups. Let's start with the Missouri State team.
We'll start with the Bears. So seems like John Callaway should be playing left field. You could put Spencer Bogat out and right. And I'll say with all this, the positions are obviously flexible, but you got Spencer and right, and then you'd be able to have Jackson and Gus as your pitchers, along with Sam as well. I mean, you've got depth there. And then if you needed a sixth guy, you got Ty Butler, who we've kind of talked about earlier as well. So, I mean, there are 6 players that I think are, well, if I look at the list, I think that's probably 6 of our top 12 or so from the top 20 list. So yeah. How do you argue against that? But every team needs some leadership. Every team needs a captain. And I feel like that's where you come in, Brian, is kind of the overseer of that lineup, making sure people are in the right spot.
Yeah. It'd be hard to tell any of these guys like what to do, but I can stand at third and yell at them a little bit.
Yeah. You can act like you're doing a lot and they'll work it out, and you can hold a clipboard and yell, and it'll be good. Work.
Yeah. All right. So I can't really argue with any of that. The only thing I'd say is maybe you put Ty Butler in left and John Callaway in right, and maybe see what that looks like. But then, again, you want to get Spencer in there. You've got 4 amazing pitchers too, so got a ton of depth there. So let's go to the Mizzou team.
Yeah. So the Mizzou team is also good. I'd say it probably packs a little more depth than the Missouri State team. But of course we'll put Chris Metter in left. I don't think anyone's going to argue with that. I would put Scott Pulley in right field, and my 1 and 2 pitchers would be Jimmy Nelson and Brett Spencer. And extra hitter, you got Paul Castellano, who we talked about earlier. Like the bench for this team, you've got Edlow, Brian Kenny. You may not need to put him in the field if you got Metter, but you've got Steve Hayes. I guess I could throw myself in there, but I almost feel like I don't need to.
Yeah.
And there's a few others that I think not listed, not named, but
Blake went to Mizzou, right?
Blake, yeah, he's on there too.
But so more depth, more hitting, maybe a DH version of something.
Yeah. So if you're talking a current day, 4-man batting lineup, 3 fielders, Missouri State may have the edge. If you're talking a 3-game series, a 5-game series, more innings, maybe the Mizzou depth kind of comes in there. But for this Mizzou team, I think, it could be managed by Kevin Wetucker. It could be managed by John Leicht. A lot of options there, but so more bodies on the Mizzou team, but you don't have, I guess, 5 of the top 11 or like the Missouri State team would have.
Yeah. Well, and then so let's go to all other universities, right? Players that didn't go to either of those schools.
Yeah, this one's good. I'm going to put Jimmy Stout in left field. Not many people have seen Jimmy hands like I've seen, but he's an UMSL graduate. I'd put him out there in left. You got the reigning MVP Corey McCarthy, Christian Brothers University. I'd put him in right, and you've got Will Raff from SLU on the mound, followed by Cam Smith from St. Charles Community College. And you've got some bench strength with Derek Cornell and the Bacula brothers, Sam and Luke.
Mm-hmm.
A guy like Chris Warbeck, he was a rookie last year. I have no idea where he went to school, but I'm gonna say he probably didn't go to Mizzou or Missouri State. So if that's the case, throw him on this team as well. As far as a captain, I kind of thought about Jeremy Warrell because he's been around the league enough. He's seen a lot to know how to kind of manage the pieces, and so it's a good team. It's a respectable team. I mean, if you put them all in a pool of games, no one can predict how that's going to shake out. It could be anything.
Yeah. I was when we were talking about this prior to the podcast, I was sitting there trying to rack my brain on how to fill out even a roster of people, because I wasn't sure where people went to school and how would you get in? Would you have the depth of pitching that you need? But this is a heck of a list. It was surprising the talent that you were able to put together on one roster for that too. And I was going to ask you like who wins maybe head to head, but we have 3 teams here, or what a score prediction would be. But I guess it is hard to say 3-game, 5-game series, like who would come out on top. If I'm going to stick with Missouri State because that's where I went to school, and like you said, you got 4 of the top 10 or 5 of the top 10 on that roster. And I think with 4 pitchers, you do have depth. It's just a matter of moving people around, but you've got Spencer can field, Sam can field, Gus can field, Ty and John on that team. So I feel like you have a lot of moving around where maybe you don't have as much people sitting at the same time, where you want to change it around with maybe Mizzou or the other guys.
Yeah. I mean, it's a literal coin flip. I feel like I'd probably give the nod to Missouri State. I feel like the Mizzou team with Metter and Blake and Paul, and maybe there's a little more like clutch gene on the Mizzou side. But especially in a situation like this, but it's hard to deny the 5-6 man rotation that Missouri State will be rolling out, led by the leadership of Bryan Benware.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe we can convince Sam to do something like do an exhibition game like this during the season this year. Get this squad out there and let them battle for bragging rights.
Yeah, I think that's the only time during the actual weekend would be the only time we'd be able to get everybody together.
For sure.
Maybe supplement it with the skills all-star powder puff games, whatever else.
Yeah. Well, that'll be fun. And I'll see what I can do to push Sam in that direction. Well, let's move on to our final topic. And it's a topic I'm calling the unknown. And basically what it is it's 5 questions that you were not aware of before we started this. So I'm going to get fresh, real reactions to these, but and we're just going to go down the line and see what you say, and let the listeners maybe learn a little bit more about you, or just get some insight on your opinions of a few things. Okay.
Yeah, let's roll.
All right, cool. So which player is most likely to win their first Sci-Whittle award?
Let's see. So it's not Scott, not Sam, not Gus, not Jackson. I'm going to say Paul Castellano because he was not one. He pitched solid last year. He was third team pitcher nationally. And he just, he throws it low every time. He paints that bottom corner of the strike zone. I hate hitting against him. I think a lot of people do. But he put up solid numbers last year. And if the A's make some noise, it's going to be because he is leading them on the mound.
Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna say if they get back to where they want to be, it's gonna be from a big performance from him on that. I could say Will Raff. We had mentioned he's been second in Sci-Whittle for a couple years now, so he's always been there on the verge. Like he could do it. I could also say Cam Smith, who was National Pitcher of the Year this year too. So he has yet to win one as well. So either of those guys or any of those three could potentially do it if we get a new face this year. So. What went into your decision to disband the Brewers franchise?
Good question. Probably could have expected that one. I think kind of maybe some of the reasons we talked about earlier. I think there's some desire to, I think being a captain for not 10 years, I guess. It's more, it takes more time and more work than I think people realize, especially, we spent so many years shuffling around 5, 6 man, even 7-man lineups. Me wanting to, much like you said with you and John Callaway, like me wanting to get input from everybody and balance that out, make everybody happy, make the right decisions. It's tougher than it might sound. So I like the idea of kind of stepping back, knowing that, my brother John being the captain of this team, knowing the players on the team, knowing their desires, their passions, their level of, hey, here's what I'd like to do. Here's what I'd like to contribute to these 3 phases of the game. Like, I'm looking forward to taking a step back a little bit. I felt like it was just kind of coming over time. When we started the franchise era, I think the Brewers kind of embodied or created that franchise the year award, and we were all about it. We chose the Brewers because we were in college and we drank a lot. It's a little different these days, as we've grown up and families and things. So those are kind of 2 of the bigger reasons. Opportunities to play with new guys like Brad. I did play with Sam back in the 3-man era with my brother Andrew. But it's so far back, I really barely remember that much. So I think I like the idea of how people are kind of shaking it up. So I kind of want to be a part of that. And lastly, I was really only going to do it if I knew that each of the players were going to have somewhere to go. And I think the first 3 players to sign this past off season were 3 Brewers, or 3 of the first, seeing Derek. I'm more excited to see Derek on the White Sox and Jimmy on the Astros than I am to see how my own, year shakes out. So that's the best reasons I can give, I would say.
Awesome. Similar to the first question, but which player is most likely to win their first MVP award?
Oh, that's a good one. So I feel like Metters already won one back in the day. Well, I would say I'm going to go with Patrick Gaddy because he has been close. He's got a great supporting cast to do that. My other thought was Jackson because I'm really curious to see what Jackson, he hasn't always been a full-time hitter as well. And MVP is an offensive award. I think that's how everybody looks at it. So yeah, he's going to win Cy-Whittle, or he has won Cy-Whittle. But I'm going to go with PG because he's a big power home run guy. I think if the lineup around him works well, he's been as close as you can get. And I think he's definitely high on that list.
Yeah. I could say John Callaway. I think the world of John, and it still baffles me he's not made an all-star, but I think new team, being a captain, being a little bit excited about the opportunity he could put up some good numbers this year as well. So he'd be somebody I'd throw out. Valentine's Day just happened. And so give a box of chocolates to one player on a different team than yours.
Well, like I would say, I'm going to give a box of chocolates to Derek Cornell. As I mentioned earlier, I mean, for a guy like him, he's been a part of the Brewers for a few years, came into the league as a Brewer. Of course, his brother Kyle was a Brewer. But I'd like to take a little bit of credit for his production. And I've given him a lot of mentoring and guidance along the way. And something about lefties, I'm like obsessed with like lefties, like swinging the bat, or like lefties, playing soccer. Like it just looks a little sweeter to me. So I really feel like he's been getting recognized. He hasn't been ranked in the top 20 past couple of years. He snuck in at 18 this year. I think people are starting to see like the talent that he has. And, I give a box of chocolates to him. Looking forward to seeing what he can do with this huge role. I mean, he may have a big pitching role on the White Sox. We didn't know he could pitch. And last year we were kind of like, can you pitch? Because maybe we have a little bit more of a need than we thought. And he did really well. So I think he could maybe be the guy behind Jackson that kind of helps him out on the mound.
Yeah. All right. Last question. You had mentioned the beer and the drinking that was so famous with the Brewers. So how much beer will be consumed on the Orioles on your new team?
Oh God. Well, not as much. Well, let's see. Let's break the question. You have to kind of break down on a per person basis. Sam Skibby, he's not going to be doing much there. He's going to be busy. He's going to be laser focused. He might have a couple spritzers, maybe a mimosa. I don't know. PG, he's got celiac disease. He can't drink most beers. He's had some lifestyle changes, much like we all have over the years. I don't, John, I don't know if I don't think my sister-in-law is probably not going to listen to this. So he might lead the team, especially if he's kind of in a managerial oversight role for the most part. I live 5 minutes. I can walk to the Skibby field in 5 minutes. So that should allow me to drink more beer than most. I don't know if it will, you got two young kids. It's like, well, it's not going to work out like that. And I really do want to focus on the performance and the production. So, like I said, times have changed a little bit. Brett, he might bring some of those buzz balls.
Those
if he's hanging out with Blake, he might be having like tequila, Dr. Pepper, whatever, whatever Blake drinks. I don't think, a decent amount. And if I think about it in terms of other teams, what other teams you're going to drink more than the Orioles? I'm thinking maybe the Marlins, definitely the Expos, and definitely the Rockies. They're sneaky under the radar connoisseurs of the art of alcohol. So I'd say we might be coming in. Obviously, we're gonna drink more than the Twins.
Yeah.
I think everybody does. I'm gonna put us at 5th or 6th safely.
Yeah. You and Brett and John would have to definitely carry Sam with all of his responsibilities. Though, if you can count what he drinks at the end of the day on, whether they're seltzers or other things, you can count those too. So,
yeah, I do. I think Sam at his own house it's got one of the best bars and setups that you could ask for. So
Yeah,
he'll do it at the right time.
for sure. Well, that wraps up this episode of the Skibby Wiffle Ball League podcast. I want to thank our sponsors, 1356 Public House, Reuben Brown, our division sponsors, Kedding Eye Center, Corner Pub and Grill, and Cardinal Blinds and Shutters. We also have sponsorships from Logix, STL Cycle Saloon, and Andy's Frozen Custard. We've got a couple other podcasts coming at you guys. We're going to have them start coming steady as we get closer and closer to season 20. We've got division draw on February 20th here, just a couple days away at 1356 Public House. Then we're going to start getting into captain interviews and looking at these teams on an individual basis. And then we're also going to have the schedule release in March. So we've got a lot of stuff coming at you guys. Getting really excited for season 20. But mostly right now, I just want to thank you, Peter, for getting on here. I really appreciate you taking the time, man. It's been fun. Any final thoughts for the fans out there?
Yeah, no, the sponsorships you mentioned, I think that we've seen those steadily grow over the years, and it's important for us to kind of have those to be able to kind of do what we do. We run the gamut on the types of sponsorships we have. You're talking healthcare, apparel, food and drink, logistics, home decor, dessert. You could live a pretty happy life with all that, but I will call out 1356 Public House specifically as the sponsor of the podcast series. They have the best happy hour that you could see in the area. I think it's happy hour like 90% of the time in the bar area. When we started this franchise era back in 2012, I know Krieger's was the big sponsor that used to be in the building that 1356 is in now. So it's fun to see that come full circle. And I know they let Jackson Crossley drink there for free as long as he does the dishes like 3 times a week. So that's pretty neat.
That's awesome. Yeah, he was the one that introduced me to 1356 last season. We went there after either opening night or the next night or something. But yeah, it's pretty great to have them as our presenting sponsor this year. We're excited for the Friday night social event there too. So, all right, everybody.
Having me, man.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. Stay tuned for future podcasts, and appreciate you guys listening in, and give us a like if you enjoyed this podcast. All right. Stay safe out there.